Good afternoon. My name is Christine Calendar and I will be facilitating today's event, which is based on the BERA report, Variation in Black Students' Conceptions of Academic Support, a philomographic study. It's been written by Mike Mimirenis, who's at the University of West London, Anita Venturis from the University of Hertfordshire, and Eleanor Wright from Bishop Grace Test. In a moment, they will give a presentation of the report, which will then be followed by a respondent response from our two respondents today, Dr. Philip Beckles and Dr. Barbara Adiwumi. Following that, there'll be an opportunity for some questions and answers. And at the end, we'll just sum up, thank you all, and then we will conclude. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce the authors of today's report.
Christine, thank you very much. And colleagues for joining us, discussants and our participants today. The title of our webinar and the study is Variation in Black Students' Conceptions of Academic Support. This was a study that was supported by the British Education Research Association and was conducted last academic year. And now we're in a fortunate position to share the results of this work with you. So the outline of our presentation today, some stuff about where we were coming from, the rationale and the aim of this work, how we went about generating and analyze data, an overview of the results, and some discussion points which we are hoping can be extended in the second half of the session.
Hi everyone, I am Anita and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Hertfordshire. Thank you all for coming today. So some background information on our study. Now, attending university is a period of notable transitions and changes on personal, emotional, and social levels in individuals' lives. However, although all students might face relevant issues, research on Black, Asian, and minority ethnic students, a term we actually contest in this study, suggests that may also experience inequalities caused by sociocultural differences, discrimination, and institutional racism. For example, in the UK, research reported that such students identified and experienced racism and inequality within university, demonstrating an understanding that these practices conform to institutional norms of behavior. Also, the Equality and Human Rights Commission published a report back in 2019 on tackling racial harassment after researching publicly funded universities in England, Scotland, and Wales. So the report stated that about a quarter of participant students experienced racial harassment, with Black students reporting the highest rate. And although in our days, in the UK, Black students are more likely than most to attend university, there is an award gap of 13%, since 81.4% of white students are awarded good degrees as opposed to 68% of BAME students. The attainment gap, of course, refers to the difference in good undergraduate degrees awarded to different groups of students. So the attainment gap still persists, despite the fact that many institutions engaged in efforts to address it. And currently in the UK, there are 91 race equality charter members holding about 21 awards between them. Also, programs and interventions aimed at eliminating attainment differentials have been in place in various institutions in the UK, providing student and staff support and training, and various attempts have been made at decolonizing the curriculum by promoting inclusive teaching and learning. Now, understanding the experiences of Black students in relation to academic support is essential in reframing practices and discourses which can improve outcomes for them. Now, research on the causes of high dropout rates for BAME students in the UK revealed concerns related to the academic support received. So participants in a recent study reported that the available support measures, including personal tutors, mentors, were inadequate and that they desired additional support services. Now, the same study highlighted the importance of faster staff responses and university reach out measures, such as the lack of timely responses would often lead students to refrain from seeking help. So also, participants expressed a desire for additional support services, including extra seminar classes, additional drop-in sessions, counseling services, mentoring classes, and so on. Also, many students reported confusion over how university services can be found and used. Now, whilst research supports the persistence of outcome differentials among higher education students, empirical and theoretical work in the UK context is often limited to an examination of the variables that are determinants of both attainment and success achievement. So in this study, we center on the understandings of Black students only, avoiding the problematic labeling of students as minorities and the homogenization of different sets of student experiences from different groups of students. And as Harper stated, persons are not born into a minority status. Nor are they minoritized in every social context. Instead, they are rendered minorities in particular situations and institutions that sustained whiteness. So the homogenization of students from different racial, ethnic backgrounds leads to the homogenization of research of non-white students' experiences. So it is quite difficult to reach solid conclusions on specific students' specific needs. And this is why it is particularly important to listen to the students' voices and provide an empirical account of their own experiences.
Now, further on, and the motivation, if you like, behind this study, ideally we would have like a separate session for our positionality and reflecting on what it means to be a white researcher doing work with Black students. But within the constraints of today's session, there was a motivation arising from the fact of witnessing racial injustice in academia. In my case, as a lecturer, I was particularly stunned to see what first I thought was a random fact, to see through the years to be a feature. And that was, and it's quite striking in its specificity, white lecturers penalizing or contesting or obstructing research that had to do with West Africa. So that's something anecdotal, if you like, that I wanted to share with you. Also, with the motivation was that there was too much policy noise, too much institutional ambition. The institutions in the UK are wide structures, and the student voices are not heard. And that is a prerequisite for advancing our own understanding, to hear what the students think and believe. And also, there was quite a lot of reflection on our own limitations of researching this topic, as part of which we chose the majority of the grant to go to employ 2 Black students who were advising all aspects of the development of this project, particularly the preparation, recruitment, and so on. We use phenomenography, which is looking at the different ways that a group of people experience a certain phenomenon. In our case, we thought it was really important not just to move away from the arbitrary characterization of BME, but also to look in the variation within the group. We took 20 semi-structured interviews looking at identifying collective meaning. The invite was referring to students who identified as Black, Black British, Black African, Black Caribbean, or of African or Caribbean heritage. We didn't make any explicit mention to any of the terms that you see on the slide, particularly nationality or citizenship. And the research was conducted, as I said, last year in one institution. So this is the sample. So it's very interesting that you might put a thing in the poll for participants, but then students identified themselves in different ways. Of course, there are all other identity segments that came through the interviews for which we don't have time to talk about in this presentation, but we just share the breakdown of the sample, how students identified us. And then for the analysis, my colleague Elena will take us through this and the results.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elena Wright from Bishop Grosseteste University in Lincoln. I used to work in Law Oxford when we did this study. So I'm going to focus on the results. So like Mike said, we tried to understand the students' perspective. So we identified what was the key meaning in focus and how it was structured, and then we compared these key meanings and tried to categorize them into different ways of understanding. So our focus was not on individual differences, but differences between ways of understandings within a group of students. So how the relationship between these categories is such that we have 4 categories, A, B, C, and D, and the focus of awareness in these understandings represented from category A to D is such that the students' understanding expands. So there are more complexity on the highest category D. So like the first category focuses on academic support as helping university students. And this was present in all the data. So all students mentioned this. And it was, as you can see, what the example says, students use words like academic support is like coming to my knees, or help out when I'm lacking, or getting help when I need. So this was kind of the minimum of what the students focused on. And in category B, the students' focus on academic support was seen as ensuring student understanding of the object of learning. So helping students to understand the academic task and guiding in what they need to know. So this was very much focused on on the lecturer's role in this and helping students to understand what is taught and what needs to be learned about this particular task or topic. And in category C, this prior focus on student understanding. So academic support is understood here as organizing measures to improve student understanding and performance. So besides focus on student understanding, this is more widely focused on their academic performance in general. So I let you read this example. So this involves a teacher who's interested in what they're teaching and caring about the students, and so communication is considered as necessary for improving student performance. So they mention things like going the extra mile to ensure that they have good performance. And in the next category, this was kind of the widest category in terms of complexity of meaning in awareness. So the focus on academic support was organizing conditions for well-being, equality, and inclusion. And I let you read this first. So this was more focused on the kind of mechanisms or structures that support the students as part of university, so that they feel included and they are supported, not just for in their understanding of the academic task at hand or their academic performance, but more holistically in terms of their life world. So like here's some mentions of having some mental health support, there's child support, and then support as part of Black minority or ethnic minority. So this is just to highlight that the need to feel included and being part of the part of university. And we have tried to describe this relationship between categories in this kind of outcome space that is the terminology of phenomenographic research. So on the left, you can see the meaning content in focus from A to D, helping university students ensuring understanding, organizing measures to improve understanding, and expanding and that expands to organizing conditions for well-being, equality, and inclusion. So this is the key meaning in focus in each of these category, or the referential aspect, the content in focus. And on the right, you can see different how these are structured. So there's like what we call dimensions of variation, object of academic support, and role of the lecturer, or agency and context in academic support. So these the categories vary in these dimensions. For example, first there's in agency and context, first there's no mention of agency of the student. So it's like they're passive recipients of support. So there's no mention, but then there might be mention in more as a recipient, and then that varies to a more complex discernment of agency and context relationship. So although the focus might be that there's limited, the agency is limited by the social structures in the university. And so this is kind of work in progress that we are still refining the outcome space of different dimensions of variation. And Mike, would you like to continue from here?
So some brief discussion points, hoping to instigate this further discussion. First, just to clarify that although phenomenography was the main methodological and to some extent theoretical framework, the development of this work and how we analyzed the data and how we made meaning of students' meaning of the particular circumstances, the phenomena. All this work has also been informed by critical race theory, in particular defining the study, the parameters of the study, and explicitly acknowledging that race is central no matter what. So in that sense, all these conceptions emerge in a structure that is wide. It's not a neutral structure. Okay, this is very important to look at the results. The results are not neutral because they do take account of racialized experiences of what academic support meant for the students. There's an area that we feel advances both in terms of methodology and conceptualization of how racial equity is researched and theorized. And our contribution, we think, is in particular looking at the variation within the group. So define, if you like, the deficiency model, the policy discourse, and looking at what are the empirical accounts, what do the students tell us, what are the different understandings in a group. And we believe that this often contrasts with what policy advances or proposes, or what the institutions at micro level, if you like, often want to pursue as an agenda. We also feel that these conceptions support a renewed focus on curriculum, teaching, and assessment. In what does that mean? Their support is to a greatest extent understood to or desired to take place in the lecture hall by the teacher mostly. So that sort of makes us think that it's important, despite the recent focus, to look at more closely into these aspects of university life. In particular, a great deal of the support is mediated by what the lecturer does. We don't quite know if that was a finding that was specific to the conditions of imposed by the pandemic, or it's something that is more of a permanent feature. It does call for an attention of not for diversity training, not for checklists, not for putting decolonializing the curriculum in appraisal documents, although sometimes this might be helpful. But what understandings do the lecturers bring in context where we have these conceptions? And these conceptions come from individuals who are racialized in different ways. Are the lecturers equipped, prepared, aware of these different conceptions, and how, more importantly, how do they deal with that? And I will go back to the example of the assignments on West Africa. Do the lecturers means what's the context in West Africa? Do they know what it means for a student of the importance of a student of the African diaspora to do research on a topic that's related to West Africa? So, and I'll leave it just there. Thank you very much.
Thank you for presenting your report. I'm now going to introduce the respondents and invite them to respond to reports. I'd like to introduce Dr. Philip Beckles-Raymond, who's a senior lecturer in economics at the University of West London, and Dr. Barbara Adewumi, who's a postdoctoral research assistant located in the Student Success Central team at the University of Kent.
Firstly, I want to say thanks to Mike and his team for asking me to participate in today's event. Mike and I have a bit of a interesting and positive rapport as colleagues at UWL. And I really respect his work, and I respect the fact that he's engaged in what I think is an effort at anti-racism, you know, and that's really, really important, I think. And that has supported structurally, supported institutionally as well. But indeed, we cannot take that for granted. And so in looking at the report, there are a few observations that I had on it, and that I want to share in the form really of questions and points. And a lot of them sort of center on methodological issues. What I would say is, as a phenomenographic study, I think the report is a good example of that. By sort of identifying an area that needs to be explored more, and doing that within this particular methodology, allows for some conversation on that to happen. In that, there's sort of 3 points I want to sort of speak to. And the 3 points really are, in a sense, taking issue with methodology broadly. And when I say broadly, what I mean by that is not just methodology as used in the research, but the methodological use to which research is put, by placing, you know, discrete studies in the context of how research is used in intersectional domination or intersectional justice. So there are 3 sort of things that come up here for me. One is the idea of contextualizing research structurally. The second is questioning this notion of Black success that hovers in and around questions of the attainment gap and students' experience in higher education, Black students' experience in higher education, and again, academic support as a notion as well. And the third one has to do with integrity in research, both in terms of production and consumption. So in the first of these 3, what I want to think about is really the important question that the authors of the report ask, and where it fits contextually. And so the idea of phenomenographic research really sort of takes into consideration the object of the experience of the phenomenon, right? And in a sense, it objectifies that. It objectifies it and looks at it as something that is a priori existing, and explores it empirically as well. And so there's something that clashes, in a sense, to me, between the interpretivist underpinnings of this type of work and what ends up being somewhat of a positivist, empirical commitment to the object of inquiry, which is the phenomenon and the experience of the phenomenon. And I get that it isn't phenomenology, it's phenomenographic. But then something about the hermeneutic seems, rather than there's a open hermeneutic at play here, there's rather a hermetically sealed inquiry. And so asking a question like the variation in students' experience, what I think is important to think about here is what are the factors and structures that the very questioning sits within, not just the study, and not just the research question, but the very notion of exploring this area and what goes into that sits within a context. And here, asking the question of what are the mitigating factors, what are the governing structures that help us make meaning of the question and also the study itself. What are they? And so the points I have here written are questions. Do these things matter for students' experience of academic support? The fact that support is being provided by institutions or an institution that might be subject to industrial action because of experiences of staff that are being, asserted as exploitative, for want of a better word. Is conversations about decolonizing the academy, the curriculum, higher education altogether being framed within the frame of this study? How does it affect what we understand to be the object of study? What about global advanced capitalism and the notion of mass corporatization of institutions? Are notions of Black students, academic support, are they commodities? Are they fetishes? Are they inventions really that allow for a housing of the ideological character of higher education in these spaces, in these objects? Are we actually talking about the humans here and the relations between them and the institution? What about calls for reparations and decolonization? A lot of the context from which Black students would emerge are spaces where you're having governments saying, we no longer wish to have the British Crown as our head of state, that are saying we need to reckon with reparations for African chattel enslavement and things like these. So what does it mean that institutions that are indicted in issues such as these provide support that is aimed at the success of a group that they call Black students? Within that, a question that comes out is the idea of success. Well, what are we calling success? If we do have some investigation into factors that might affect how students succeed or how they perceive attempts to support that success, there's a question that comes up there about, well, what if this works? What if students are successful or this support helps students to be successful? Then what really is the nature and character of that success? Is closing the attainment gap compatible with the eradication of anti-Black racism and intersectional justice in higher education in Britain? The third issue, I think, is one of integrity. And I mean, integrity runs through all of this insofar as the relationship between research into the Black experience in its various contexts and the enduring need to address and to eradicate intersectional domination. To the extent that we might have good research that doesn't lend itself to intersectional justice, there's a question of what good is good research. And so in looking at the language in the report, and indeed its compatibility with wider liberal ideals, we have language like equality, personal and social well-being, and respect. We have progress, development, and success for every student as part of the university community. There's something very liberal about the philosophies underpinning such language. And the philosophies that underpin such language being liberal, being born out of a Euromodern sort of conception of society. And we know when we say Euromodernity here, it invokes, in keeping with sort of decoloniality, the underside of coloniality that comes with Euromodernity. So what then are we to take of the context of intersectional domination and its relationship with education in advanced capitalism? And here, when we say education, it's important that we understand education not passed out and dichotomized between higher education and other types of education, private or public, etc. If we understand education as something that is state-sponsored, state-sanctioned in the way capitalism is, then we're looking at students' experiences in relation to intersectional domination as a structure through institutions like education in its various forms. And so what then are we to make of that? And it's the issue of integrity at the level of research. And again, here, not just for researchers, acknowledging a sort of bureaucratic character of education and of institutions within intersectional domination means that it is not just the issue of the researcher, but who funds research, who supports research, who consumes research, right? So the sort of question that comes out then would be, how does this study and our engagement with it allow us to confront contradictions that might arise in the scope for integrity between overarching structures that inform society and the institutions that met that out onto our interpersonal relationalities. And here, sort of Patricia Hill Collins's matrix of domination features heavily in considering this, right? And so how does integrity work between, is the British higher education system part of a wider complex of intersectional domination? And to the extent that it might be, what does it mean for research and the integrity for aligning structural aims and institutional aims? And that's on one hand. On the other hand, we're looking at how do the liberal ideals that loom large in research of a type that is pushing equality or inclusion, words that in themselves reify a domination imbalance. How do they sit next to another set of ideals that really are intersectional justice and anti-racist structural transformation? Can the two be deemed compatible? Does one undermine the other? And to which should we direct purposive research with integrity? So I sort of leave my response to the report with these, good research should prompt further questions in a sense. And so what comes out for me are these questions that are driven and sort of really inspired by the work that's done in this report. I'll end there.
Thank you very much. And Barbara, and I invite you.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. Thank you, Christine. Okay, so I took a very practical approach to reading the report, and thank you very much for inviting me to respond to it. And may I first say, first of all, I enjoyed reading it. I found it very interesting and your findings to be very insightful. I understand that the funding was quite small and hence the sample was quite small, but however, the quotations that have arisen out of this research has allowed, as Philip said, room for more research and questioning, and kind of a deeper dive into what we understand about students. So I'll start from the beginning really of the report, where you had the summary, where you gave the research question about what are qualitative difference in which Black HE student experience academic support. And then you had your 4 different experiences of academic support, which Elena had explained. So I thought straight away, that is a focus that is needed on the curriculum design, also teaching methods, and in particular assessment, but also assessment and feedback, because we're talking about academic support. So I was wondering if you could delve into that more about how academics actually relate the feedback to students once they get it, and whether students even read the feedback, for example. Yeah. And how do academics respond to that and vice versa? So I think that's quite core as a part to methods of assessment. So from the A to D, different ways of A to D that you have listed, I thought there needs to be a mixture of support and the need to operationalize the conditions for high quality support services. So what that means there is that they need to be talking to each other. So there is a joined up way of thinking about academic support rather than it being in silos, and there's a miscommunication along the way, because as you said, students had commented about not knowing where to go. So the signposting is not even clear and there is confusion. So obviously with your research, you need to find out, well, why is there confusion? Where are the gaps in the system or in the structures? Okay, so moving on, you had key concerns that need to be extensively researched, which of course I entirely agree, because I do this sort of research myself. And you had ideas such as unmet expectations, financial and family difficulties, institutional factors, and so on. So all of these things, all of these factors or key concerns spell out one clear thing to me, which is this is about understanding your students for who they are, as in their authentic selves. So many of these students that you're researching here are not entering higher education on a level playing field. What I mean by that is that compared to their white counterparts, there are variations of social, economic, and cultural capital that are accumulated from their social environment, through their families, etc. So those sorts of lived experiences need to be appreciated by academics in order to understand where their students are coming from, where their students are starting from, and where their students need to go. Yeah. So that's an extension of the research I feel that you also need to do. Moving on to, I'm going to refer to the pages if you don't mind, because I don't have slides. Moving on to page 7, 1.2, you had students' perception of academic support. So what I found from there was that clearly the support on offer is not welcoming. It's not welcoming enough for them to feel that they're entitled to actually go forward and ask for help. So here we have the issue of a deficit model approach, which has been done many times in the past, you know, where they have targeted Black students in particular. Either they're coming from a BTEC background, they're coming from not a grammar school, but a comprehensive school, you know, not doing A levels, but doing BTEC or even access qualifications as well. So alternative routes to getting to higher education. And these students are perceived through a deficit model approach, and they're seen to be a problem that the institution needs to fix. And I think that is one of the issues that academic support needs to deal with. You know, whether academics are thinking that way. Are they really genuinely thinking about a student from equitable point of view. You know, that everybody's in the same boat and, you know, are here to learn, and we should be actually caring more about the relationship between the students rather than just having them in a classroom and seeing them having all the same abilities. Yes, we do admit that they can have the same capability, but it's obviously getting the academic support to get them there to reach that level of capability. So I feel that once again, a caring relationship and a dialogue between students is required, and that's come through the quotes that you've given. For example, they've asked for more group work. So that tells me that students are looking for extensive interaction with other students. And it doesn't have to be students who look like them, because that can sometimes be a hindrance to their exposure of different cultures and different understandings of people, because when you get into the world of work, that's what you face. So it doesn't necessarily mean that their groups of work, the groups that they work in, need to be of the same ethnic minority background as them. Also, they had asked about, or they were seeking more student and staff help, meaning counselling, mentoring, extra seminars and dropping sessions. So that spells out to me that they are not getting enough and the institution is missing the mark here. Yeah, because they have structures in place, you know, where they have well-being services, they have study skill services, but what the students are saying is that it's not reaching their needs. So what this research needs to expand on is perhaps more of a case study of students where you can map their journey of learning, say in one module, and be able to find out from them, okay, so where are the pinch points where they want to seek actual academic support. So moving on to 4.1, which is category A of helping university students. I think there is an issue here about when students actually seek help, as that hasn't come through in your quotes, but I think that's an extension of your research here, because from my experience of some of the research and some of the observations I've heard from students, it's a timing of when they actually self-identify of when they're actually needing of help. And usually this is far later in the day. For example, just before a submission of an assignment, there is a bit of a panic and they realized they need help. Okay, so then there's a panic across all you know, support systems about how can we help this student in such a short space of time. So it's about you know, really getting to the academics, really to get to know the students and finding out if they actually need help much earlier on in the actual teaching and learning and relationship building. And also there's other things such as can academics identify things early enough before exams, for example? Has a student managed to kind of personify their revision technique in time to actually sit the exam without panicking? So again, that's an extension of the research I feel that is needed about how much of an effort do academics make in understanding their students and identifying their particular needs, you know, for each student? You know, where are they coming from in terms of seeking help, or you know, why are they not seeking help is another reason. Why are they leaving it too late? Also, moving on to category B, ensuring support and understanding of the object of learning. When we talk here, as you do, it runs a thread. Understanding the student is a thread that runs through this report. I think what we're dealing with here is the expression of care for ensuring student understanding. So those academics who do this kind of stand out, you know, the over and above academics. They're seen as going over and above when in fact, really that should be their priority. That should be their job, is to understand the student and supply them with extra information, extra help when they need it in order for them to meet their criteria and the objectives to pass their module. So I think teaching and communication methods need to be improved when it comes to pedagogical practices in the classroom. And moving on to category C, organising measures to improve student understanding and performance. Again, that is about going the extra mile for academics, but also it's going above on a quality of interest in the subject and the student. So the academic has to show enthusiasm. You know, this is what the students are asking for. This is what I can see in the quotes, coming through the quotes of the students, is that in order for them to engage and keep them interested, the academics need to show enthusiasm for the subject that they teach. And sometimes that's not coming through. And that might not be coming through because of the way the teacher actually teaches, in terms of, oh, they've run this module several times, you know, so they're kind of quite blasé about it, when they have to understand that students are investigating this for the very first time, you know, and they're very curious to know and they're very interested. But you can quickly disengage a student if you say the wrong things, you know, if there are microaggressions in the classroom, you know, which I know this is what you found in your research, that there are moments of microaggressions, you know, in the classroom, which can quickly disengage a Black student and make them feel very isolated and alienated within the classroom. And then there's category D, organising conditions for enhancing learning, well-being, equality, inclusion, and the academic community. To me, that spells out the difficulties in asking for support by students. This is a key issue in universities, who find it quite difficult to deal with, I find. And this could be because academics are coming from a place where they can't relate to the students that they actually teach. And the reasons why they can't relate is because they're not making enough effort to get to know the students, such as academic advisors. That's an opportunity there, or personal tutoring. That's an opportunity there to ask a student, you know, tell me a bit about yourself, you know, tell me a bit about your background and, you know, where you come from and what interests you and why you're here at university. So there was a student in your quotes was saying that we struggle in silence, and as Black students, we need to be able to go and ask. Now, this is to do with areas that we've researched on at Kent, to do with perhaps culture, yeah, and upbringing. So, for example, you know, the groups that you have as your categories of students that you've studied tend to be brought up to be quite diligent, responsible, and respectful of their elders, and they're told to try and work harder. So this is compounded by pressures really from their social environment, from their families, and also the sacrifices that their families have made for them to be at university. So all those sorts of things can create high expectations and aspirations for that student. So imagine all that so-called pressure placed upon the student when they arrive in quite a white space. You know, you've talked about whiteness here and the use of critical race theory. So I think this is something that you can explore far more widely. And just to let you know that academics are a useful instrument here in your research. For example, you, instead of just having one-to-one interviews or focus groups, you can actually hold an event where you have a panel of Black staff, for example, talking about how to survive the academic year, and invite Black students to come in and listen to that. And then you will find that Black students will ask questions that you may not have thought of, in order of how they want to know how to seek for help and information. But I don't think I've got time to go through everything, but such things as email etiquette, for example, is a way of, you know, getting beyond your entitlement, the idea that white students have entitlement to quickly go and ask a question. You know, they hardly hesitate to ask a question, whereas Black students tend to hold back longer. Why do they do that? So you need to extend that research more. And so just to conclude, really, I think there is a need for staff to reflect on their pedagogical practices and assessment styles of feedback. And there needs to to be a sense of cultural sensitivity in all of this research. You know, you need to really extract that out of your research. You know, are academics culturally sensitive, culturally competent? You know, and I think I'll actually end it there for now and leave other ideas for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Sorry to be rushing everyone along, but I'm conscious of time. We have just a few minutes really for questions. If anybody would like to ask, can you just turn your mic on or put your question in the chat and I can put it to the panel.
I've got a question, if that's okay, Christine.
Hello, Yvonne.
Hello, Christine. Hello, panel. Thank you for the report. The question I'd like to pose is something that Mike started with, and actually the issue about who's actually conducting this research. You know, so it's yet again another study of predominantly white academics being conducted about Black students, and what were the considerations given to this before putting in the project, you know, putting in the proposal, and what are the implications of this going forward? Because you mentioned it, Mike, but didn't actually go into much discussion and the kind of reflections that you had as a team in terms of doing this particular piece of research.
Thank you very much. This is a very relevant question. And before that, of course, thank you, Philip, and thank you, Barbara, for your well-thought responses. I kind of touched on that question very briefly. We were aware of that limitation. The measure, if you like, or the step that we took was to employ 2 Black students who were advising these work. This was a conversation. The paid element was, I think, it had to do with a recognition that this is work, so it has to be rewarded as such. But besides that, we learned, because the study was shaped and reformulated and influenced by what our students said. So that was important. In terms of the practical implications, I think Barbara mentioned the operationalization of this potentially. I think there's quite a lot that fits into what the lecturer does. How does the lecturer mediate the support the students receive? How culturally informed that is? What types of knowledge are the lecturers sort of offering or giving priority to? Is there contestation about these forms of knowledge, and this kind of relationships around that? And of course, there's another point that was raised about the extension of research, which would be more closely based on the lived experiences of the student. I recognize this is a big area for further work. Of course, the limitations of our work was both time and intention were there, so we were not really able to touch on that. I mean, on a personal note, I have learned more. I have learned more around the limitations. The students who worked on the projects, they benefited from that, and we've been supporting them following the end of the project, including some public speaking, and we're still in conversation with them and in discussion with them around all these.
Thank you. So there's a question in the chat, building on Philip's point about the limitations of the focus on reducing the attainment gap. being the measure of improvement, what other ways, other than closing the attainment gap, would the panel suggest could be used to measure an improvement in race relations in universities?
I think if I may say that I think in my experience and my understanding is that unless there is a recognition and an honest acknowledgement that the structure is wide, the structure can be crashing, the structure can be erasing people's subjectivities, values, types of knowledge, types of existence. Unless we get to that point, I don't see much of progress.
I think it's often useful to answer questions with a question in some way. And the question here is, how many institutions have an anti-racist policy? You would see a plethora of equality policies, you know, with an anti-racist policy or anti-intersectional domination policy, which we understand might be commercially suicidal. But if we're looking for improvement, that isn't a sort of dog whistle to a liberal notion of progress. If we want things to be better, then they have to be, you know, the structure has to change, right? And that's the structure meets us interpersonally through institutions, family, education, government, etc. If we're going to actually address the idea of anti-racism, not just race relations, there's a sanitizing of the language even that we use, right? Where's the anti-racist policy? Where's the anti-racist praxis? Where's the intersectional praxis? Where's the feminist commitment, Black feminist commitment to ending anti-Black racism that requires something that looks structurally courageous? All right, if there's not that, then what are we speaking about?
Thank you, Philip. Barbara.
Yeah, I would concur with Philip about the need for the change in institutional culture. And an anti-racism strategy is one way that you can actually say to the institution that you are now accountable for those objectives that you have set. And therefore it should be driven through this sort of institutional research as well, where you are addressing those issues through research and recommendations that will then be going up the ladder to the executive group, for example, who are responsible and accountable for the anti-racism strategy. So it's not just a tick box exercise, you know, or they're just simply for rhetoric because of Black Lives Matter. It's there to change and progress the institution as a whole.
May I just say one more thing? Sorry. We can measure how much research funding goes to Black female academics to address the problem of Black students in higher education. It's a quantifiable metric if that's what we need, right? We can count things if we need to count things. You know, there's if you want improvement, who are the researchers that are actually being responsible for the experience of Black students? How many Black female professors are there in British higher education? Those are things we could count. So if we're looking for measures of improvement, again, I think there's something here that, at the risk of being biblical and that being an issue, you know, and Martin Luther King said this to America, which is analogous in some ways. He says, Nicodemus, you need to be born again. And that's something that higher education might reflect upon. The very structure and architecture of British higher education is incompatible with intersectional justice.
Thank you, Philip. In that case, then, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank today's panel. Thank you, Mike, Barbara, Elena, Anita, and Philip for being here today and giving us a very interesting and insightful presentation and some thoughts for us to take away. Thank you so much for being with us today.